Hey everybody, it is 11:32 on the East Coast of the United States. This is your host, Purple Smurf. I'm going to roll my opening credits and do a little talk. Today we're going to be joined by Jesse White, White Knight Illustrations. He is currently the amazing artist of DEUS VULT, a Crusader story. We'll get to know more about that when we talk to him. He's also a devotee of John BUSCEMA and an expert, I would say, on Conan, the lore, the comics, both in the books and in the comics. And Conan is a big topic for me too, so I know we'll get into that. I just want to say that it's 2002. It's just past the old tax day here in the States. It's April. We're not even halfway there. We're not even in the 5th month. And so I'm going to proclaim 2021 as the year of indie comics. If you've ever had an idea, something you want to create, something you want to draw, a story you want to tell, this is the year. Now look on the screen right now. You see, this is our mascot, Clint. Clint is the robot panther from a 1978 Japanese cartoon called Gordion. You can probably see right away he's the original of Ravage from the Transformers. But, you know, there's nothing in the world stopping any of you from creating. If you're a Gen Xer like me and my guest, if you could have imagined a future where you can collaborate with a comic book with somebody in Peru and someone with art in Argentina, you'd have access to high quality, small batch printing. You'd have access to 24/7 internet marketing. You've had access to sharing files, audio files, video files with creators globally in a second. I don't know. This is the time to create. This is the time to make your book. This is the time to roll out your first issue, even if it only sells 30 copies, 40 copies. And there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of this versus that, but none of that matters. The only question of 2021 is, what can you build? What can you make? What can you create? What story can you tell that you've been waiting to tell? So, you know, I've got a comic funding right now, Tales of Zero. It's sort of a Lovecraftian, Indiana Jones, jungle, psychedelic, alien adventure, and I'm super proud of it. We're funded, and it's a small campaign, but it's also my first campaign, and I don't have delusions that you have to break the bank on your first campaign. If I can fulfill and make the readers happy on number 1, do a little bit better on number 2, do a little bit better on number 3, because in this comics world, you can't steal somebody else's shine. All you can do is build and create and grow through your own word of mouth. So if you're coming to the end of the credits today, I want you to watch this scene. I always love this scene. So Gordion has just trounced his enemies with a electric whip. He's given some words of wisdom, and as he drives away, he throws them a box of Band-Aids. He says, "Come on, Clint, we gotta go." So, hey, here's your Band-Aids. And what does the guy do as Gordion, as Daigo walks away? The guy says, and this is the key right here, the guy says, "Thank you. Thank you for the Band-Aids." Right? There's always going to be someone better than you. There's always going to be someone whose campaign is making more money. There's always going to be someone who's doing the thing you wish you were doing. So learn from them. You know, the person that can beat you should be your inspiration and should be the person you learn from. So no whining, no complaining, no hating, no trashing, no bashing. Just make your dream, okay? It's 2021. All right, so with that in mind, I have a guest today, Jesse White. So glad you're with us, Jesse. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm great, Purple. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Isn't this nice? We're in 2 different countries, 2 different time zones, and we can just hang out.
It's wonderful. I still got snow on the ground where I live, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm here in Greater Boston, and we had snow just on Friday. We had snow, so that was just 4 or 5 days ago. Yeah, it was a shock to everybody because we thought we were done, but yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'm pulling hard for the spring here. My wife's a big gardener, and it's going to be really wonderful. She does a great job every year, and it's just so nice when the flowers start coming up. We got a little bit of crocuses, and we got a little bit of sun, but we still got the snow. Yeah. It's going fast though.
Yeah, here in Greater Boston, we've got about 2 weeks where you actually have apple blossoms, cherry blossoms, those Sistina plums, and all those things, and it's just 2 weeks, and that's it. And if you don't stop to take it in, you miss it. And so we're kind of in the middle of that right now, and it is awesome. All right, so people that don't know, you're, I would say, really knowledgeable about Conan, about John BUSCEMA, about the year 1982, and so, you know, people who are with us, let me make sure I'm keeping track of the chat. Sometimes I'm so into like talking with my guests and just hanging out that I forget to check the chat. I forget to do all the things. I forget to be the host. So got to remind myself to do these. I'm going to have the chat on my phone, but I don't know if anybody's in with us right now, but if you are, thanks for watching. If you're watching this on the repeat, go subscribe to Jesse's YouTube channel. Jesse, what's the name of your YouTube channel?
It's called The Pursuits of a Polymath, and I talk about a lot of different things because I have a variety of different passions and skills. There's construction in there. There's about fitness. There's drawing stuff. There's stuff about literature. There's stuff about Robert E. Howard. There's stuff about comics. It's a lot of different things, and I try to movie reviews, and I try to cover a lot of them with a high level of kind of knowledge and attention to the details in it. And I think that it's due time for me to post something new. It's been around a long time since I've been working on this project that I haven't posted anything in the videos, but I keep getting subscribers. So come on by and subscribe.
Yeah, I can vouch for when he has a video up and it's on a topic, let's say it's about John BUSCEMA, let's just say it's about, you're going to get your money's worth, your time's worth if you watch one of his videos. They're full of really good content, really thoughtfully explained. It's very good stuff. I think your YouTube channel is high in the quality realm. You know, some YouTube videos for 20 minutes of time spent, what did you really get? But I feel like in one of your videos for 20 minutes of time spent, you get a lot.
That's really great to hear. A lot. I'm also trying to work through the Conan comics and read them out loud and present them as a dramatic reading, which has kind of been a popular thing, though it takes a long time. I have to photo every page and photo every panel. It's a nice project, though.
Yeah, I actually have one that you might want. I'd love to get your feedback on, but I wrote an ashcan for my comic for Tales of Zero. I have an artist in Texas who, you know, I work with, and he's like, I'm going to draw you an ashcan. I said, fantastic. We need a story. And so I've recently been going through all the Conan stories. And so I wrote this ashcan story for him. And it's definitely, if you like Robert E. Howard, you're going to get a lot of the nods and winks and stuff that I did in it. I know you will get them all. But I also did a dramatic reading of that. So you check that out, and then the next couple of days, tell me how you think I did.
I'll check it out. Yeah, it sounds great.
But it's about 17 minutes, and yeah, I think reading those things aloud is a blast. Reading all the great pulp writers aloud.
Yeah.
Because they just, I mean, I'm you know, whether you're talking about Clark Ashton Smith, my comic Tales of Zero is, you know, a send up, an homage, a love letter to one of Clark Ashton Smith's stories. I mean, Clark Ashton Smith is. His control of words is astonishing, and if you read it out loud, you're just like, I can't believe this guy. This guy is on such a level when it comes to just putting one word in front of the other and making a cascade of effect. Yeah. He really puts Lovecraft to shame. I say in one of my videos about the difference between Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, I say that, like, Lovecraft says, you know, I walked up to an abyss and saw a vision so horrible I couldn't describe it. Where Clark Ashton Smith actually has you in the first-person protagonist voice push through the abyss, and then you fall through the abyss, and he describes it. That's the difference. Like, you know, you fall face first in the abyss, and then he describes it. So.
My friend, I call out to him, Jason Cadman. He's a brilliant specialist in Lovecraft and all this sort of stuff, and we laugh together about the trope that you just described, that, like, the monster that's so hideous that it just can't be described, and this thing, this is such a cheap shot, you know.
Lovecraft is so good. He's so good, and and when he reaches that point, it's almost like it becomes a wink wink. I think he knew it. He knew that was one of his things. So I think after a while he had fun with it, because he goes to describe the moon, the moss on the tree, everything in such insane detail, and then finally he gets to the monster, and he's like, you know, a shocking horror that shattered my consciousness, a vivid image I'll never cease from my eyes until the day I die. And you're like, yeah, but what did it look like?
Do you remember that one about Houdini, where Houdini gets trapped?
So good.
It's so good. And when he describes this thing, he says it's something like a hippopotamus, and it had the quality of a lion. And you're like, okay, I'm sort of working with it. And then he says, and then I realized the hideous shape was but the forepaw of this entire monster.
Yes.
Like, well, what does it look like? You never know.
Exactly. Yeah, that one is a classic one, because, again, in that one, I mean, some of you, if you're not pulp aficionados, you're like, well, who cares? But it is so good. The setup of that, how he gets thrown into the pyramid, how he feels his way, and then finally he sees a procession of ghouls and hobgoblins, and Lovecraft describes every detail of everyone. But you're right, when he finally gets to the apex monster, That's when he kind of falls flat and
Yeah.
can't bring it home. He's
Yeah.
like, it was like a yellow cat with the hippo. Forget it. It was bad. It was scary.
It was very scary, and it made me, and I fainted or something.
I fainted. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a soul shattering. Yeah, I love that one. I love that one. Imprisoned with the Pharaohs. It's so good. Yeah, all right. So cool. So today we'll definitely talk about Robert E. Howard. I'm actually drawing Cull. I'm drawing King Cull. That's my drawing. So I took I swiped the pose. So I took the old 1978 John Carter, Warlord of Mars Marvel comic.
Yep.
And the annual. And so I swiped the pose because a lot of by that point I think the Conan, the style of like the Conan Marvel comic had bled into everything, right? If John Carter covers look like Conan covers, it all becomes kind of one thing. But then I replaced his sword with the axe, and I changed a bunch of other details, and so I'm going to be inking that while we talk. But I love that story, By This Axe I Rule.
It's great.
And then he did it. It was the Phoenix on the sword, right? He did it again.
Right.
He did it again. He did it two times. He did it one with Cull. Then he told the same story with Conan. Yeah,
I would say the difference between Cull and Conan is kind of a quality of sort of stateliness. I think Cull is kind of, he's a king, of course, and he's got this kind of really deep melancholy in him all the time. And
yes.
I think that Conan is a little more vital. He's kind of like a bit on fire. And I think King Conan tends to be a little melancholy, but Cull is definitely a more undeveloped character. He's got a lot of the qualities that Conan's going to have, I would say.
Yeah. He was an early version, but I love the Mirrors of Tizun Thun.
Awesome.
That's a great Cull story in which it kind of doesn't go well for the hero.
No,
the hero falls completely into the wizard's trap.
Totally.
And then it takes his friend, was it Brule
to
bust it. And that's something I do with Tales of Zero too. It's like I have my main character is this sort of like call him Han Solo without the heart of gold. He's a smuggler, he's a swindler, he's a liar, he's a space pirate, and he actually is a jerk. He lacks that redeeming quality, but he's a great storyteller. So what happens in Tales of Zero is you get brought on this ride as Zero tells you this story, but there's all these hints along the way that he's kind of flavoring the story to make himself look good. And then I leave some hints at the end where you can sort of see that it didn't go the way he wanted to. But I have his right-hand man, his Chewbacca is Osillo, and I definitely have that same vibe where in almost every story, Osillo has to get Zero out of the problem. Zero always paints himself as the man of action because he's the storyteller. But Osillo, who's like the strong, silent type, is the one who in almost every story actually saves the bacon, actually gets Zero out of the trap. And it's a little bit like that with the Mirrors of Tizun Thun, where Cull is, this guy, but he falls deeper and deeper into the trap, and then in the wonderful climax, boom, Brule like breaks through the mirror. And so I do something a little similar to that in the Ashcan, where I have Zero get so bogged down in the enigma that Osillo has to be the one to break him free.
What's also interesting about the Cull is that in Conan there are a few touches, but Cull has got it more. That Robert E. Howard was part of that network between Lovecraft and the others that were writing that mythology, and this kind of serpent men element is Howard's kind of touch into that sort of otherworldly kind of ancient evil that exists, and the serpent men are a major part of Cull, and I think that they're a really good villain in them. And I think that oftentimes you can see in the Conan yarns that there's a few kind of gods like that are deep from the outer space. Like if you know the one, the Veil of Lost Women, the Veil of Lost Women.
Sure, that's a great one.
That has one of those great elder gods comes down, and so they were all people have called them pen pals. I think that's a weak description. I'd say Howard and Lovecraft were correspondents. That's a little bit more elevated in its intelligent level of what they were talking to one another, and they all wrote to each other and they added things to themselves. And we were mentioning Clark Ashton Smith just a bit ago. He's a little younger, but he worked in Lovecraft would praise a lot of his works that he did. And what do you think of Ashton Smith's sort of Lovecraftian mythology? I guess his stories are called the
Tsathoggua.
Yeah, Tsathoggua, and he's got that whole network that are in.
Yeah.
Ancient time. Volusia, the Volusia, right?
Yeah. I'm the person that when I was a teenager, I was into comics. And then I kind of started playing guitar, started playing like, rock and roll and garage bands and things. And around the same time that I made the switch from like comics to music, I found Lovecraft. So in the ages of 13, 14, 15, I believe I read every published story of Lovecraft. And I wish to God someone had shown me Clark Ashton Smith back then. Because now that I kind of can see the Smith side of things, I think Smith is fantastic. I think he's the equal, if not the superior to Lovecraft's talent. But Lovecraft gave him a lot of directional, hey, try this, zig this way, do this, and zig that way. Now come back and show me how it worked. So the thing that Clark Ashton Smith has, he had Zothique. And Zothique this is amazing. And I think in some ways, Zothique was like Clark Ashton Smith's. He was able to do the thing that we wouldn't see until like Thundar the Barbarian on Saturday morning cartoons. He was able to take sword and sorcery into the future, right? Yeah. So Zothique is the Earth, like 8,000 years in the future, where technology has crashed and people have gone back to an Earth-based living. But magic is also real. But the continents are in new places. So that frees him up to have future technology and magic and barbarians and knights and monsters. It's like the ultimate fantasy playground where he can do everything. He can have a medieval town and he can have like a wizard's castle hover down into the middle of town like a spaceship.
Yeah.
So the Zothique was, I think, his crowning like way to have it all as a writer. But then he had Hyperborea. So Hyperborea was his version of the Hyborian age and the Lovecraftian. And I think Clark Ashton Smith just rocked it. He made his own thing that was in harmony with what they were doing. But he just made it. He made his own sandbox in there that is so legit. I think if you had to boil Lovecraft down to a single story, it would be, The Shadow Out of Time or The Temple. And The Shadow Out of Time is my favorite Lovecraft story. It hits all the notes that you need. And I think if you wanted to understand Clark Ashton Smith, you would read the City of the Singing Flame. Have you ever read that?
I'm really bad with titles. Would you tell me a little bit about the plot?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the plot of this one, and I have a video about this on my channel, is that basically he and a friend, and it's not really him, of course, it's just, a writer of fantasy stories named something. Yeah. And they go camping in this place called Crater Ridge, and they see these stone formations. And because they're writers, they're like, oh, what if these were the columns of an ancient civilization? And so they get all captivated with this idea. And then he, on his own, sees this thing that looks like the base of two pillars. He steps between it, and he's actually transported into this other reality.
I've never read it, but it sounds like so many good ideas. Yeah,
it is the foundation of so many good ideas. So in this other city, in this other realm that he ends up in, geometry is different, color is different, and he finds this city, which is built by inhabitants of a totally different proportion. And then in this city, there's this, and I don't want to give too much away, but there's this sort of central altar where there's a green fire that produces this harmony. And once you start to listen to this green fire, like it becomes something you can't separate yourself from. It becomes so addictive almost. And so then he keeps going back through the portal back to reality. And then he, of course, has to tell his friend, like, friend, I found this thing. So then they both start going. But then the singing flame becomes to possess his friend more than him. Oh, my God. It's got everything. And it's so beautiful. It's so, when he describes things, he really describes them, And then the other one I would say, which if you doubt that Clark Ashton Smith is anything less than Lovecraft, it's The Dark Eidolon. Have you ever read that one?
Definitely the title. Tell me the plot. I can't remember the plot.
This is the one that I was kind of alluding to earlier. So in the plot of The Dark Eidolon, there's this wizard, and he's feared.
I love this story. I know this one totally.
And then it's because when he was young, a rich person didn't move his horse out of the way. And the rich person was going to run it. So he committed his life to learning all the black arts to pay back this rich person. You remember this one?
This is great. Yeah.
It is. It's so dark and macabre. It has the most.
So many about a wizard. You know, there's that
Yeah.
other one about that wizard that's sitting in a sort of a tower, and he's got the whole town in fear, but he's actually like there's a cabal of wizards, and they're plotting to destroy this high wizard.
Yes.
What's that one called?
Is that might be the Death of Malagrise?
That's the Death of Malagrise. Yes, that's it. That's it. Right. I love that.
There's elements of that one in the Dark Eidolon too, because you know
Malagrise,
you're following Malagrise. So you're following this guy, and you're like, oh, he was just a poor kid, and he was hurt by this rich person. So of course he's going to become a demonic wizard to try to pay back the rich. Of course. But then when that happens, the rich person has grown into this utterly sick and twisted, disgusting tyrant, you know, who abuses his people and has no moral worth whatsoever. And then the second half of the story is the wizard, who was the young boy who was run over by the horse, parks his castle in front of the king's castle, and it's two of them realizing that they have to face each other. But the king doesn't realize that this wizard is just the poor kid he ran over with the horse, you know?
Yeah.
Oh my God. And then the end, the resolution of that. That's the thing. Another thing about Clark Ashton Smith is that his resolution, his sense of morality of how good wins over evil. Oh no, it doesn't go that way. Good doesn't win over evil, you know, but evil doesn't win either. You know, it's sort of like Lovecraft, where in Lovecraft, the evil is so indifferent to mankind that mankind loses. It loses not because evil is evil. Mankind loses because mankind is insignificant in comparison to cosmic evil. You know, that's like the Lovecraftian thing. But Clark Ashton Smith's version of that is even more bleak in a way.
Yeah. There's a lot to say in that. I brought up to mind two stories that I can think of. You'll have to remind me of the cycle that he has where he makes up this place in France, and it doesn't really exist. What's that place called?
It's called Averoigne.
Averoigne, yeah. So this is one of those Averoigne stories, and it's about going back in time to some like early, you know, the one.
Yeah, is it the one like he stops at the tavern and then he goes back in time? Yeah, so good. Remind me what happens in that.
It does not have an ending where you feel like it's a triumph. You're like, basically the priest kind of gets tricked by this Celtic priestess from deep in the past. And so it's very, very much like what you were saying. There's never this kind of good always it's triumph. It's a kind of an ambivalent ending, you know. And it actually brings the question a little bit about whether or not the priest really cares, because he kind of sort of feels pretty. Remember when she's got him in that past time, he stays with that bacchanal for like
he loves it
or something.
Exactly. He loves it. He has another one like that. It's called the Enchantress of Solaire. I think it's also in the Averoigne universe. So like, you know, there's this happy-go-lucky guy, and he's walking through the woods, and he sees a beautiful woman bathing in a pool, and he follows her through 2 columns, and then he ends up in this other world, and then she gives him everything he wants. You know, the Enchantress of Solaire. She gives him all the pleasure, every sensation that he could ever desire. But there's this wolf that follows her orders, but is always pestering them. And then, of course, it comes in time that he and the wolf have a moment. And then, of course, the wolf says to him, like, she's horrible. She has a monster, and she's making you think she's beautiful, but she isn't. And he's like, you stupid wolf. You know, you don't know what you're talking. But, of course, it's true. Yeah. And it takes him a long time to pull himself away from all the pleasures that she's dumping on him. And that's a great one.
Also, like the one with the castle with the Lamia in it, where where he goes to visit that scholarly monk, and he shows him the forbidden book. Again, the same sort of a theme where he has to be torn away from this Lamia by the priest. Yes. And he says that he'll never go visit that part of the city or the world again, because he'll go right back to the Lamia. You know, you can't do it. So, you mentioned rock and roll, and I'm not sure what your interest of music is, but I'm a big fan of heavy metal, especially, and I like lots of 80s rock. And but there's a Clark Ashton Smith cross with Iron Maiden. Do you know about this?
Oh no, tell me.
Okay,
I love Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden has a record called Peace of Mind, and that happened to be the one that came out. Second album of Bruce Dickinson, and it's got a song on it that's not well known. And when I was singing in my heavy metal band, I covered it, and it's called Still Life. Still Life is about a man staring into a pool that's got ghosts inside of it, and eventually it causes him to throw himself in there, and he believes that he should throw his wife into, and that is the same story as Genius Loci.
Genius Loci, yep.
The same story. Harris, for certain, took the plot of that and made that into the song, and I think that very few people know that. That's a piece of a secret Iron Maiden lore there.
Oh, I love that. Well, I love to know about kind of rock musicians who took Lovecraftian themes, or and that's a great one. I mean, you have I remember I was playing music and reading Lovecraft as a young teenager, and the Black Sabbath has the song Behind the Wall of Sleep.
Yeah.
And Sabbath, and then Lovecraft has his story Beyond the Wall of Sleep.
Yeah,
I always thought that was kind of funny. Like, all right, well, there you go.
Yeah, totally.
There's an interesting one. And of course, Metallica had a bunch of them. But that's funny. You go. No, you go.
On the album Peace of Mind, there is a song, and I bought it when it first came out on the LP, and the last cut was called June, but it got sued by Frank Herbert, and it got changed to, as you see now, To Tame a Land. It's about Paul. It's about
Paul Atreides.
Yeah. It was called June on the first pressing, but you can't find albums with that print on it anymore. They changed the title. Yeah, that's
funny. I think again, that's why I like having you on, because I know we can switch from weird fiction to music to comics. But when I was a kid, Metallica wasn't my favorite thing. But I really respected what I was hearing, though I wasn't a super fan. But we used to the people who were obsessed with Cliff Burton, those people used to make me laugh a little bit. I'm like, why are you so obsessed with this guy? I play bass. I play bass too, and I love my bass heroes and all. But the Cliff Burton sort of adoration seemed a little much. But I learned more about him, and he was incredibly well read and incredibly musically educated. He was not a dum dum.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, he had more music theory training than any of the other guys.
Yeah.
And so he was a guy, like I have to admit, when I found out more about him, I really assumed when you see him in pictures, he's just a giant mass of hair just thrashing about. And I think he really cultivated that persona of I just wild, I'm crazy.
Ah! Yeah.
But I think, in the studio and coming up with ideas, he was the one who was tying in literature and, harmonies from Bach and, let's do this riff 7.5 times instead of 8, He was one of the guys who was really driving the complexity of it.
Yeah.
So I think he was a little bit like, Geezer Butler in Black Sabbath was also a guy who I think he was the one reading Lovecraft. He was the one having the ideas for the more cosmic songs. I was responding to someone on Twitter with an idea the other day, which is Robert E. Howard has a couple of these stories where his protagonist goes into a past life, and experiences some lesson of his remote ancestor.
Yeah.
And so the two that come to mind are, I think it's called The Children of the Dark, where he goes to this cave to assassinate his rival for the love of a girl.
Yeah.
But then that's the first appearance of Conan, so to speak, though it's not the same character. It's called Conan the Reaver. Yeah. But so then he meets his ancestor, Conan the Reaver, and then he has this adventure fighting the monsters in the cave. And then he comes out of the adventure, and he's a lot more forgiving of his girl for being unfaithful, and he no longer wants to shoot his rival. He sees things in a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I love that.
There's another one about I never know the names of these things. I'm really poor with that, but it's about a man and a manservant, and they're up in Ireland, they're in Ireland, and the manservant, they're both Americans, but the manservant has Irish roots, and he is being kept in bondage by this Italian person because the Italian person has something over on him. And that's the one. That's the one. It's the cairn in the headland. The cairn in the headland. That's another one where it goes back in time, and it's not the narrator that. Oh, maybe that one is told first person.
I think it is the narrator. Yeah,
it is. I think it is. So there's another one.
And he becomes his ancestor.
Yeah,
and then has the battle.
Has the battle, and he comes out and he kills. Yeah. He actually uses the thing that the god gave him in the past, I think, to defeat the creature in the present. Oh, that's awesome. It's like it's a sheep. It's a piece of thistle, I think. That's what it is. Yeah. So I was saying to somebody on the Twitterverse the other day,
who was into prog and also into weird tales, and I was like positing to them. I don't know if you like Yes, but Yes has their record Tales from Topographic Oceans.
I've got it.
Oh yeah, so the song Ritual.
Yeah.
So I was positing that the song Ritual is kind of in a Robert E. Howard mode, where it has the present day person and they're having their mundane existence, and then in the central section there's that battle, which is like the ritual combat where he connects with his primitive ancestor and undergoes a trial by combat. And then in the third section, when it comes back very peaceful, he's actually more at peace with the mundane ordinariness of life.
I love it. What a great analysis. I love it.
And I was like, as I was reading the Karen in the Headland, and I thought of that music right away. I was like, oh my God, that's in the center section. He leaves the modern world, connects with the primitive ancestor, has this trial, and then returns to the modern world. And so I mean, those guys were well read too. So who knows?
Howard himself, he had these overtures of feeling that he was a man out of his time. And he, of course, lived in Cross Plains, Texas, and he was living during the Depression. And he, I think it's pretty well regarded that he was one of the smartest people in his town, which was a small town, but they said he'd read every book in the library. Now, Howard hated school. He didn't like it. He was a crackerjack thought person, and he basically had lots of overtures, and he did have Irish ancestry, and he thought of himself constantly like he was a man out of his own time. And I really admire a guy of his nature working during the Depression as a writer. He was working, constantly making money, and in a going nowhere town. And he was making money on the pulps. I think he's a hardworking guy.
Absolutely. He was his self-made individual, and the scope of his vision and the way he took his access to history books, histories of the Picts, the Celts, early Britons. And he just said, all right, I kind of get that, but what if it was this? He just tweaked the history into his own vision. I mean, that's really amazing. I think it's really incredible that he could do that, and that it was something he kind of needed to do to tell his own story.
Have you ever seen the film A Whole Wide World? The Whole Wide World?
No, I haven't.
That's a wonderful movie about Robert E. Howard's relationship with Novelyn Price. It's a wonderful movie. It came out about 1996 or something like that, and basically low budget. Vincent D'Onofrio plays Robert E. Howard.
Oh, but he's a great actor.
Yeah. And the girl in Bridget Jones plays Novelyn. What's her name?
I can't even remember. It's been too long.
Blonde-haired girl, but she's actually a Texan. And it's a wonderful movie, and it's got lots of great little sequences about their life that was really direct. And Novelyn was alive during that time. And this can put to bed any of those people that are still out there that think the character's name is Conan. His name is not Conan, it's Conan. It's an Irish name. Novelyn Price, when she was alive, said this straightforward. She said, Bob never called him Conan. I don't know who this Conan character is.
Yeah.
It's because I think this is my own sort of study into it. Lots of people say it was because of the John Milius movie, and I think that's false. I'll tell you why. Because I was talking about his name when I first encountered the character before that movie came out, and there were people that called it Conan back then before John Milius' movie.
Before the movie,
I believe, and I think John Milius is fallen into this exact paradigm, that the name Conan comes in people's minds because of Tarzan.
There you go.
Tarzan is nominally like Conan. And so they associate the two together. And since Tarzan has been a character since the black and white movies, it was well established in people's minds, and they just made that jump together. What do you think about that? That's my own study.
That's totally probable. It really is. But people have a way of doing that. Like, you remember how people used to call Princess Leia Princess Leia?
Remember that? Yeah, I remember that.
That was a long time. That was a long time.
Yeah.
And that people called her Princess Leia. When we were growing up, we called her. I know you're my generation, so I presume that we all said Princess Leia when the first came out.
Princess Leia still does.
Yep. So sometimes a little mispronunciation. It's how it in the newspeak that it's how it went viral. And once it spreads that way, it's hard to undo it.
Yeah, and it's reasonable that people that were kind of on the normie side of things. I mean, that's a word that doesn't really make sense in the 70s, but like people that were just people that didn't pursue science fiction stuff. The name Leia is not a name, but Leah is a woman's name. So it's a very easy sort of a very easy, nice job. Look at that. How did you do that? You do that on a piece of paper, but it's on a computer? How did you do that?
No, none of this is computer. So this is just, everything you're seeing here is ballpoint pen.
So what was that light thing you were drawing with?
So this is pencils. So basically what I did is, here's my pencils. My pencils are pretty rendered, you see?
Yeah, yeah.
And I did this just by looking at the John Carter cover and then just changing details. So I gave him an axe. I gave him like 1980s heavy metal hair. And I have him saying, "By this axe I rule." And I gave him like a Cull logo, like a Kiss logo.
Yeah.
So here I have it on a light box.
Oh, it's just a light table. I see what that is. I thought that was a screen. I see what it is.
No. So I'm just going over just the faintest outlines of everything in ballpoint. And now I'm going to go to like a heavier pen and start building it up. But I'm the kind of person that I'm not a very skilled inker, you know, and I'm just an artist for fun. So if I go to a heavy pen too soon, I always ruin the face.
I'll grab my ink sheet that I was working on today. I can't draw and show the camera at the same, but I'll show you something. I use a brush to ink. Like, just excuse me for a second.
Someday I'd like to try that.
I'll be right back. Hold on.
Oh yeah, no worries. Well, thanks to all the people. If you're watching in TV land, I really appreciate all of you guys. I think you can see Jesse is an incredibly well-informed and just amazing range of topics that we can talk about if you're a big-time nerd like us. And I'm having fun. Conan stories. You know, we can get even deeper into the Conan stories, but I would say one thing people don't understand about Conan is that, and Jesse and I'm sure we'll talk about this, is that he was an expression of a philosophy. It's very easy to think of a barbarian as a person without philosophy, but Conan not only had a philosophy, but he was in his person the expression of a philosophy. And in his stories, he always comes up against a chance where he gets to, by his choices, demonstrate that philosophy against the contrast of what, you know, Howard would, you know, snidely call civilization. And so the real Conan character is very interesting and not really as widely understood if you've only seen the Arnold Schwarzenegger films, which are great in their own campy way, but they don't get into the philosophy of Conan and why he does the things he does and why he makes the choices he does, as much as you can find in the novels and the novellas and the short stories. I'm trying to think of this one that I read recently where he, you know, he does the whole adventure. He gets in and out. I'm talking about Conan stories.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of this one where he does the whole adventure. He runs into the girl, I think, and you know, I think it's the one. What is the one? Is it the Black Circle? I think it's the people of the Black Circle.
Yeah.
So he doesn't even, the girl doesn't even like him. He doesn't even like the girl. You know, he accidentally kidnaps the girl, but it turns out that the girl's brother was killed by the bad wizards of the mountain.
Yeah.
And so eventually Conan's like, well, you know what? I'm going to go to the mountain and kill all the bad wizards. And the girl's like, all right, we found something we can agree on.
Yeah,
so they do the whole thing.
Right?
Yasmina, right?
Yeah.
But then in the end, like, he doesn't get the girl.
No, he doesn't even.
Yeah, he doesn't even.
Yeah.
He doesn't even get the treasure.
No.
And in the end, he's like, but all in all, it was a pretty good day. You know, I love that when he has the choice, you know, he has the choice to ravish the girl or not.
Yeah.
You know, so often he like makes the respectful choice that the wizards would never have made.
Yeah.
I
like the part where he gets up to those mountain tribesmen and he throws the Devi a couple of like raggy clothes that some
yes
shepherd woman was wearing. And she just, the shepherd woman walks off in the buck naked. And Conan says, I like you a lot better with these peasant clothes on. You're a little bit more reasonable, like more easy to get. Yeah. So she has a shine on him a little bit there. I think she feels the raw quality of a primal man, someone that she's never met. She's a court lady. I think she's even the Devi, and she cannot actually ever relate to people like this. And so Conan kind of gets her blood going a little bit because he's kind of the manly individual, the real. I always call Conan the kind of he's essentially like the essential man. My favorite part in that describes essential man is essential man doesn't spend a bunch of time trying to figure out the meanings behind things. He's a man that does things because he knows it to be correct, and he does it straightforwardly, and he never stops about it. Like there's so many instances of that. Like you could count from the God in the Bowl, how he won't betray his employer, who basically is a crooked little slime. He won't betray him. But my favorite moment of it is the first story I read of Conan, which happened to be The Devil in Iron. And I had the edition that had the Boris painting on the cover of Khosatral Khel there, and he's got that sort of look of confusion on him, and Conan's back is to you. And there's a fabulous sequence in that, and tell me if you remember this, where Khosatral Khel is essentially an iron golem, like he's like a god, and his body is steel, his body's metal. Conan realizes when he tangles with him at first that this is the first time he's met something that's man-like that he's not going to be able to handle. It's like he's done his best to it, and it just did nothing. I think he even breaks his poniard on its belly, and so he picks up this heavy piece of drapery, a tapestry, and he throws it over him, and he barrels into him with a big bench and basically runs, and he takes the girl upstairs. He locks her in this big heavy door, and this is the part that I think is the most awesome Conan moment. It's not a moment of violence, it's not even a moment of heroism, it's a moment of like essential man. And what essential man is that he's not bothered by the philosophy and deep thoughts of things. It's not that he's stupid, he's just direct. He doesn't spend any time because he's a barbarian. That Howard talks about this over and over. Khosatral Khel comes to the door, and of course the door is heavy burnished steel, and it's bound by iron wrappings, can't be broken down. And Khosatral Khel starts pounding on the door, and it's actually shaking the door in its hinges, and big dents are coming. And it says Conan sits down. Why is he sitting down?
Why is he sitting down?
The girl says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "There's nothing to do at this moment." It's just like in the Star Wars prequel when Qui-Gon Jinn sits down because those laser force fields are blocking him from Darth Maul. So Conan sits down on the ground. He says, "There's nothing to do," and the woman is terrified, but he's not wasting any of his energy standing up, being edgy. He's just waiting. And then even Howard's greatest moment where he says, "And the barbarian looks at the power of the devil in iron behind the door, beating through the steel." And Conan allows himself to muse that he feels marginally envy of the strength that the god has. I mean, I thought this is the most awesome essential man. He's not even worried that he's going to die. He's going to do his best effort when he comes through. He's going to fight to the death and give the girl a chance to run. But he's not even worried at this moment. I thought it was fabulous.
Yeah, I think Shadows in Zambula has a similar thing where he encounters the bodyguard of the wizard, and the bodyguard of the wizard is just a massive individual with incredible muscles, and Conan's just like, "Oh, this guy could actually kick my ass."
I think it's Baal Petor is his name. Baal Petor,
He's like, "Oh man, this guy could actually kick my ass." And
they have that choking competition.
Then they have the choking competition, and Conan eventually. That's a great setup too, because these things were serialized. I think so. You had to wait a month. Can you imagine the cliffhanger that he left you on, where Baal Petor is like got Conan around the neck, and you just like, and he's like the strength, and then it's like to be continued. Like literally, you had to wait. You had to wait a month or 2 months to find out what happened. And it's so satisfying when Conan finally, wins that one. But and then that one too, where the girl turns out to be the queen, and she was pretending to be the prostitute.
And Conan stole the gold at the jewel. He stole it from her.
But then
a ring.
Yeah,
wasn't
the ring.
It was a ring. Yeah.
Yeah. But he's like, yeah, I knew.
Yeah, I knew all the time, and I got to see you naked.
But he had that respect too. Like, he never actually ravished her. He always acted like that was his motivator. But that's what she kept saying was his motivator. She kept promising, "I'll ravish you. If you just kill this wizard, I'll ravish you."
Yeah.
But in the end, like, he knew the deal the whole time. He knew who she was and who the husband was, and I find some of those moments of like where he shows the respect to the girl right at the end. I find those moments they're really touching, because he's not doing that for an audience. He's not saying, "Look at my good behavior. Look how I didn't." It's like you're saying, he just praises the situation and was just like, all right.
He's also respectful to his opponents in certain situations. Not everyone, but do you remember the one? I think it's called Iron Shadows in the Night or something.
Yep. Iron Shadows in the Moonlight.
Iron Shadows in the Moonlight. Is that the one where there's a giant ape? There's many giant apes. So that giant ape's attracted by the girl, and Conan struggles with that giant ape, and it tears out huge chunks of his hair, and he gets in basically a wrestling check with it. And when he kills him, he says, I'm going to count him with the men that I've killed, and I'm going to drink like to him in Valhalla or something like that. I'm going to drink to his memory, because that thing was almost a man. And he says the same thing about Thak when he kills Thak, that was a man almost that I killed, and he respects them.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun that you know the story so well. It really is. Because hey, Edwin, I don't take the chat. Edwin, glad to see you, buddy.
Yeah,
we're in a deep dive about Conan. We're talking about Conan, the essential nature of his character that doesn't always come through in the movies, but since in the comics world, the adaptations were done with so much reverence for the originals. So if you read the Red Nails and you read the Marvel Comics adaptations, was it Roy Thomas who did the adaptations?
Yeah, Roy Thomas.
He was not messing around. He really kept a lot of, when you read Red Nails and you think, okay, now do this as like a 60-page comic, I couldn't imagine it.
It's the same. They
did it. Yeah, they got the beats and they got the things. And if you told me adapt this, 8-hour story into a 60-page comic, I don't know how, but boy, they did it. Barry Smith's layouts are fantastic.
Roy actually was majorly. Go ahead.
No, just where the camera is in every shot to kind of give you a sense of moving through the space and seeing things before they come on panel, but you get a little preview of what's coming. I think the storyboarding of the Red Nails, it's a masterclass of how do you tell this really big story in tiny little boxes. The viewer can only look through a tiny box. How are you going to tell a massive story?
Is having a Stegosaurus in it. I just never got over that Stegosaurus. That just bothers me.
It does look foolish. It does look foolish.
It bothers me. But when I think of Tascala, I picture that girl. When I think of what's the guy's name that's been living in the catacombs all the time with the big bag? His name is Tothmerki. Is that Tothmekri? Yeah.
Tothelmek or something.
Tothmekri. Yeah, I picture him too. I loved how Barry drew him with like almost no neck at all. His
basically no lower jaw.
No lower jaw, right.
Yeah,
that's what it is. His top teeth basically rest on his collarbone. It's disgusting. Yeah.
It's so disgusting. And I like those moments. And I tried to pay homage to that, in some of my Ashcan, where Robert E. Howard, he does, I think, again, because it's a serial. It was like in the pulps and you had to wait and you couldn't read it all at once. That he will have that Deus Ex Machina sort of big finish, where like something bursts through a wall,
it's great. That's the perfect ending, man. When he shows up coming from the pit, and then it becomes this unbelievable duel between Conan and the monster, because he's got that wand.
The laser. He's got a laser.
A laser wand that works between metal, and Conan realizes that they become this deadly dance of death, and he pins him with that dagger. My God, it's so exciting! I love it so much.
I know it is. It's just like when you look at what Clark Ashton Smith and what Howard did, and you think, okay, the year is 1934. Yeah. What we need is a zombie king with a laser.
Yeah,
and he bursts out of the wall right before or during the lesbian kiss.
Yeah, right before. Yeah. There's
I mean,
lots
like,
of this.
holy cow! These guys were in the 30s and they were living our own like VHS childhoods.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They really were, and I say that to anybody. Like, if you grew up watching like sci-fi and sword and sorcery or whatever in the 80s, and you like even the bad movies,
I do.
You really need to respect what the guys in the 30s were doing, because they
absolutely.
already did everything we could dream about. They had done it already.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. A zombie king with a laser wand is going to come out and essentially save the day. He's going to
Valeria.
Saves Valeria, basically saves Conan.
Yeah. Conan's got his leg in a trap. Remember that?
Yeah, like a steel trap. Yeah.
And Tascala says, "Can you kill him?" And Conan grunts, and she releases him from the trap so that he can fight him. She's more scared of him than she is of Conan. That's awesome. Yeah.
And what a great story. Red Nails is like, it's so uncompromising, and I think he had that idea that he wanted a lesbian tension between the two female leads. And he knew that. He said that in his own words. He was like, "Oh, I'm going to put a lesbian tension between these two characters." He's saying this in 1934?
Yeah, Tascala is definitely a lesbian. Like she doesn't love anything except power, and she's interested in women. Howard put a lot of like women torturing women scenes in
he did.
Stories. Yeah,
yes, he did.
I think he had a little bit of a kink there. I think.
Oh, he really had that kink. It's the Devil in Iron.
Yeah,
that was the first one when I was like, "Well, okay, Robert, I'm getting a little picture into your kink right now."
Yeah.
Where he leaves the female like chained up with her hands above her head, and I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
And he like leaves her there, and I was like, "Okay, Robert, I can see what gets you going, buddy." But again, they were exploitation pulp stories.
Yeah, it was totally pulp. Yeah.
I tell people all the time, if you haven't read comics from the 40s, you have no idea. No. If you think stuff is violent and sexualized, why do you think they had the comics code? Go read a comic from the 40s. You're going to see violence and sexual objectification of women on a level you had no clue. That people think, "Oh, it was nice. It was nice in the 40s." Man, the 40s comics are brutal. The horror comics are disgusting and gory, and the crime comics are like full of sleaze and seductresses, and it's wonderful. So that was the age they were in. The age of salacious. I mean, the covers of Weird Tales were incredibly salacious. I think people don't give Weird Tales art the credit it deserves, sort of setting the standard. And then another guy who like links all this together. Yeah, seriously, fresh news. You know what we're talking about. You've read it when Howard does the female. Yeah, he gets into it. He gets really into it. And then he had there's so many we could talk about, but I want to not get off of where we were talking about the Weird Tales covers. Oh yeah, here's a guy. You want to talk about the link between the Weird Tales era and what we call comic books? The dude is Gardner Fox.
Yeah.
That's the dude. That is the dude who took the Weird Tales ethos, and then he was working at DC, and they're like, "Yeah, we need about 7,000 stories. We need an Adam Strange story, a Green Lantern story, a Flash story. What can you do?" And he just banged them out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason that the Weird Tales, if you've never read Weird Tales and gotten into weird fiction, but you love comics, when you get into it, you're like, "I already know this world." Yeah. You know it because Gardner Fox kind of imported that into DC Comics and Marvel Comics. So big ups to Gardner Fox.
Can a guy get Weird Tales like the original ones on eBay and stuff like that?
I think you can, but they're collectors. Collectors are driving the prices up of good conditions.
I would like to have one of those. That would be kind of cool to have a Howard one of those.
Oh yeah. But those are the ones that are worth money, of course.
Of course they are, yeah. The ones that like nobody's
ever heard of, yeah. Those aren't selling for much, but the ones that have like Drums and Zambula or whatever, it has the most salacious cover. Oh yeah, those are.
Yeah, those Margaret Brundage covers. You ever see those paintings? They might even be like chalk drawings. I guess they're paintings, but they're so soft looking. Do you know those Margaret Brundage paintings?
Yes.
Those Weird Tales covers, yeah.
Yeah, Apex in the chat, who's doing the art for my Ashcan, he's saying that Gardner Fox was the writer for Doom Patrol. You know,
I don't
so
know
yeah,
that so much.
yeah, but it's like, yeah, Gardner Fox wrote everything.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote
you know,
everything.
back you were talking about stuff in that era of being sort of BDSM and stuff like that, and like, have you ever heard of Sweet Gwendolyn?
No, I don't think so.
Sweet Gwendolyn was a bondage comic about an adventure girl sort of doing things, and it was written in the 40s, and they made it in the 80s into a pulpy sort of a show, and it was called The Trials of Gwendolyn, and I made a knockoff
I remember
of
that one. I remember that show.
In the land of the Yik Yak, yeah.
So I remember that.
On my Patreon, I have a patron-only subscription comic, which I write in the form of a comic strip, and I call it The Trials of Ingretta, and it's basically a riff on Sweet Gwendolyn, and it's a jungle girl story, and she basically gets herself in these pulpy situations, and there's like giant apes and giant snakes.
I love stuff
like that. Savage
like
kingdoms, and it's on issue 10 now, and I'm putting it in the form of a strip that you would see in the comic or in the newspaper. So it's presented horizontally, and you get like,
oh wow, like 3 or 4 panels.
Yeah, 6 panels. I think I give 6 panels.
Great.
And it's a really fun story. It's my original one. It was one of the first crowdfundings that I tried to, but it didn't fund because I put the price up high enough for me to work at it for an entire year, and I got a fair amount of money, but not what I was looking for. And then I went to the Patreon model, and I'm going to publish it eventually when it gets finished, and I'll run it again on crowdfunding. But it was done out of love of that pulpy stuff.
Yeah, I love it. I love the pulp stuff too, and it really is an education for people who don't kind of see how far back some of this goes, how our beloved tropes, how so many of them really have their roots in the 30s and the 40s when people had so little, and they had radio instead of TV, so you had to create your own visuals, and so people like Clark Ashton Smith and Howard, they were able to create a movie in your mind that was just incredible, so captivating. But it's interesting because I know from your social media, and we don't have time, Jesse, but I want to thank you. You are like a great guest. I love riffing on topics with you.
Yeah, it was a nice talk.
Yeah, but I know that you sometimes, and I'm going to risk this. It's going to make me a little. All right, let's agree that I'm about to open a can of worms, but we can just put it aside for another day.
Sure.
I know that you sometimes create a dichotomy between anime inspired and then the classical American illustration school. And I'm a huge anime fan, but I'm a Gen X anime fan. So I grew up with Star Blazers and Guy King and Grandizer. And so the anime that I actually love is from the 70s. And so it's not exactly the same, but I love it to pieces. And gosh, where am I going with this? Okay, yeah. So manga. I didn't know much about manga, right? I'm a Gen X anime guy, We didn't know, we didn't even call it anime. You remember what we called it.
Yeah.
And
I do.
I don't need to tell you.
Yeah.
And we called it that lovingly and with respect, actually.
Yeah, not racist. That's just
no, it isn't at all. It isn't at all. And if you go back and look at all the early VHS releases, it's called that.
Yeah,
it's called that. Wasn't a nickname. That's actually what the trade name was for it when it was sold in American stores. And it wasn't racist at all. It was said with a lot of love and respect because that's all we had. But anyway, where am I getting to? Okay, yeah. So manga. I love my favorite anime of all time is called Galaxy Express 999. And if you've never seen it, Roger Corman did an edit for American theaters in the late 70s. Something you'd show at the midnight footage when everyone was stoned or something,
Yeah.
So it didn't have to make sense. It's just a trip visually. And so, but you can see a good edit of it. You can see the Roger Corman edit, and there's a 2-hour English edit that's quite good. It also used to show on, actually, do you live in Canada, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it used to show on TV in Montreal, with a French dub. Because it's kind of racy. It's not a cartoon in the standard sense. It's very surreal. It has a lot of strange elements, but I love it. It's, to my mind, it's the greatest anime. But so the creator of that was also the creator of Star Blazers, Leiji Matsumoto. And so I love his work deeply. And so I went to look at the manga where he first created Captain Harlock. And it was a Western. It was called, brain, come on. It was called, someone in the chat help me, Gun Frontier.
Okay.
So in Harlock, which is just amazing, you know, Harlock and Galaxy 999 and Star Blazers, like they all actually inhabit the same universe. So in Harlock, you know, Harlock is the dashing Han Solo type, and he has this roly-poly sidekick named Tochiro, who is like a genius, but he's just this roly-poly goofball. And then there's the female space pirate. Her name is Emeraldus. And in the end, like Emeraldus and Tochiro, they are the love. They're the love, you know. So the absolute nerd with no game who looks like a potato gets the greatest girl in the world, you know.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like you expect, well, Harlock is obviously going to get the girl, but no, you know, Tochiro does. And so in Gun Patrol, in Gun Frontier, he was first developing the characters. So in that version, Tochiro is the main character and Harlock is the sidekick. And so it takes place in the Old West. And what happens is Tochiro is this Japanese samurai in exile in the Old West looking for this lost colony of Japanese people. Harlock is like this sort of soldier, sailor, mercenary that he just picks up along the way. But then they have this girl, I can't remember her name, the girl in black. And she follows them along and they bring her everywhere. But she's also constantly undermining them and working for the enemy. So you never know whose side she's on. And in almost every episode, she has like an R-rated affair with one of the characters. You know, she has an R-rated affair with one of the villains, and then she has next one she has it with Tochiro, and the next one she has it with Harlock, and so when I read the manga, I was like, whoa, I didn't expect all this rated R content, you know, in every episode. But you think about manga is that it was read by these guys on the trains in Japan. These guys who were about to spend like 8 hours in an office cubicle.
Yeah.
So the manga was just like the pulp. The pulp was the same thing. Like you're in New York City, you're about to like be stuck on the train or something. And like for that hour, you're in Robert E. Howard's world, you know, you're like a swashbuckler who's like grabbing the girl and fighting the monsters, you know, and I think manga was the same way. So the roots of manga and the roots of pulp have a salacious element because you're just providing a little thrill to this commuter who's going to their job, you know. And they're going to have that thrill, and then they get to work, and then they work in a cubicle, and then they come home, and then they get a little thrill, and then they go home. So I just think there's some common DNA there, not by necessarily relationship, but by the function that it served.
I agree with that. That's a totally excellent point. When I toured with my band to Japan, and when I went on the subway, or it's not a subway, they call it, or the train, I guess they call it. You'd see them just those books laying around, and they were as thick as an 80s phone book. Yep. And printed on that type of paper. Like they were, those comics are, and they were all like colored pages, like yellow and pink and blue. They're just disposable garbage. That's exactly what they were.
They're a pulp, you know, and so, yeah, that kind of like titillating, like, ooh, there's a naughty bit coming. Oh, got to go to work. You know, it's like that. It needed to have that one little payoff, that one little titillating payoff before your subway stop. You know,
but if you look at Japanese wood block prints, there's always a sort of an element of perversion in some element, you know, like a little dick sticking out, or
some sort of erotic elements.
There's a little bit of weirdness there, I think.
Well, and that's true. Every culture has their like erotic element. I mean, Britain and Great Britain, you know, in the world stage, it's like, you know, stiff upper lip and all that. But really, come on, dude. Come on. For hundreds of years, they've had ribaldry and Chaucer. And, you know, it's like, dude, you've been into the bodice ripping stuff. And the you know, the pants rolls and the people switching beds in the middle of the night. And
how about pantomimes every Christmas where cross-dressing is the standard?
So the English are not even like, they've got nothing to say. They're in it all the way when it comes to that kind of. And then the Germans are the same way. The Germans have a genre called Schwank, which is basically like potty humor. And like you can trace the history of Schwank like back to the Renaissance and medieval, that like, you know, kind of like potty humor is a cultural thing. You know, people think it's funny when you talk about that stuff, and like people thought it was funny 200 years ago too. Just again, like Canterbury Tales. Like,
I love the Canterbury Tales. It just kills me. And you read the general prologue, and you present that to children or something like that in school, and you're like, you spell out what these things are saying, and people can't even believe that it's medieval. Like, have you ever read the Miller's Tale?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the soul shattering climax.
The soul shattering climax, where he's considering that he doesn't remember his girlfriend having a beard when he's kissing her arse. Yeah. It's freaking hilarious.
Yeah, she has her backside out the window or something. Isn't that right?
She sticks her butt out the window and asks him to kiss it. And he goes for a big kiss, and the thing that's going through his mind, he goes, I didn't think she had a beard. What the hell?
Yeah. So anyone ever tells you that the English are like, it's different, but like we would never.
No.
We are not amused. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff is amazing. So there's room for that. And then of course I think that extends to our childhoods in the VHS era, where you have a sword and sorcery movie that's going to have one sort of like topless moment.
Oh yeah.
Or several. And that was or several. And that's just like, all this is part of a continuum. It's not like it just came out of nowhere. There's a context with this. I even think of this with comics, where I'm the kind of person, one day I'm saying out loud, we need to make comics that kids can read. Come on, let's not forget that it's about kids. But then you go back and you realize, no, dude, who was reading these comics in the 40s? It wasn't kids.
Yeah,
like this stuff is and the problem was when kids started reading it. That's actually what
comics for kids, and then there's comics for not kids.
Yeah, and back then they had these comics with the crime comics and even Wonder Woman, of course. Remember, she used to get tied up in every issue.
Yeah,
people forget that.
Yeah,
people forget that. That's part of a continuum as well. So the truth is always so interesting when we get past the shallow, like, I don't like the DC, I don't like Marvel. It's like, well, go deeper, because there's so much stuff. Yeah. There's so much baggage culturally in this stuff. And if you don't like what DC or Marvel is doing right now, and to a large degree, I don't worry about that. There's so much to discover, so much you've never read, so many different things you don't know about. I
want to tell you about a program that I do with my best friend from childhood. I grew up in the country, in rural BC. British Columbia is the province I live in. It's on the west coast of Canada. It's it was pretty wild where I grew up, and of course, being in the 80s, it was even less connected. So my buddy from across the road happened to have a collection of comics, which he'd sort of jump-started from, get this, his grandfather used to own a confectionery store in the 60s, and he just kept a bunch of comics. So he had Hulk #1, Avengers #2. He had seven copies of Silver Surfer #1, and they're like in perfect condition. And we're in the 80s sitting here looking at Hulk #1, and I was like, what? He also had some really bizarros like Plop and stuff like that. But his collection had been jump-started not because his grandpa was a collector, but because he used to own a confectionery store, and he just didn't sell these comics and left them in the back. So Peter is his name, and he introduced me into comics, and we just really used to go crazy. I spent like 1982, and the first limited series came out. It would be the Contest of Champions, and we'd just go nuts reading it. And because we were country kids, we'd have a very interrupted opportunity to get the correct issues, because we'd only be able to go into town when our parents were going to go shopping. So you'd miss some every so often. So sometimes he'd get one, and sometimes he'd get other. Now, I'm only bringing this story up not for nostalgia, but because of a project that I started with him a couple of years ago. And you're saying, if you're unhappy with what Marvel is doing or DC's doing, there's lots of things to look at. So what Peter and I have decided to do is, we wanted the comics to be back in our lives, because really when the 90s came on, I stopped buying comics because I just did not
like the same way. I didn't like the 90s style.
I didn't like the look. I thought the art was wrong. I thought everything was backwards. And I was doing different things, I guess. And I didn't read comics. So comics weren't a part of my life. And I, for some reason or other, remembered fondly them. And so I got in contact with my old friend, Peter. And this is what we do every month. Purple, I think you'll like this. If you've got a friend in comics, you can do this. What we do is he lives in the city, and I live far from him, like many, many miles away. But we contact on the computer, and we pick up comics from 1982 or around there that we didn't buy back in them, and we read them again, and then we get on the computer together, and we talk about them just like we did when we were kids. Like we both get them from different places.
Oh,
He
that's
either
awesome.
gets them from a comic shop, and I get them from eBay. So I'm certain 1982 was like, if not the best, one of the best years of comics. You read that Sal Buscema, Bill Mantlo run in the Hulk. Every single issue is awesome. It's awesome. Every single one of them. You could read them again and again and again. And every comic that we read, and we're like, Hercules Limited Series. That was 1982. You're like, it's so good. It's like everything.
All right.
They were
I'll definitely check those out.
Every comic.
Yeah.
If you
I'm kind of this.
Buy comics again. Buy old comics.
And find a friend and geek out about it. Yeah, for me, I was the same way. I loved my peak years of reading comics were 86, 85, 86, 87. And so when the 90s style came, I was also much more into music than comics at that point. But I didn't care for the Image Comics, Wildstorm, Youngblood style, and I didn't care for the way it looked. I didn't like the colors. I didn't like the shapes.
Paper. I didn't even like the paper.
I didn't like the paper. Oh my gosh. So when I go back and I do what I'm doing, you should see what I'm doing with Tales of Zero. I put dots on it. I put parts where the colors don't line up. Because when I was reading it, I love the way things didn't line up. I like that you get the orange, to do orange, they would overlay pink and yellow, right?
Well, sometimes it'd be outlying. Yeah.
It'd be off a little bit. And then you get this third color that nobody intended to do. Oh my gosh, I live for that. That to me is how it all felt when I was the most excited about it. So I try to do that same effect with digital.
I'm going to go buy it. I didn't know you were running something. I'm going to go buy it tomorrow.
Tales of Zero. You really should. And then Brett, who's in the chat right now, he's doing the Ashcan, and I call Brett style. You would love Brett's style. Yeah, Jesse, you're saying Brett. You're saying Jesse sounds like a cool guy in the chat. Yeah, Brett. Jesse does everything by hand with a brush. Everything's and. Brett is the same way. I don't think you use a brush, Brett, but he does everything by hand letters even. So
Wonderful.
when I look at Brett's style, I see like Green Lantern in like 1964, 65. I haven't even talked to Brett about those influences, but Brett knows it's like Gil Kane. The way bodies move, the way things are organized, I think it's beautiful. I just think it's beautiful, And if you haven't seen what Green Lantern looked like, in their early Silver Age, I think it's freaking awesome.
I'll show you
Brett has that quality.
Can you see
show
that?
us that. Wait, hold on. I'm going to maximize. I realize I've been maximized this whole time. All right, Brett, check this out. Oh yeah, it's out of focus for some reason. See if you can shake it and get it to focus. So, yeah, we're not Jesse. It's a little bit out of focus for some reason, but yeah, Jesse's work is insane.
Closer, maybe is that better?
Yeah, or just kind of, try to get the computer to catch it. But anyway, we're not seeing the detail, but we're seeing all the deep black and some of the brush strokes, and it looks awesome.
That's a shame. Well, you can check it out on the computer. I've got lots of things on my Twitter. I put it up all the time when I'm just moving along.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the crafts of actually putting every hash mark in, and the way that when you look at Brett's work, I think it's sensational, and I'm so excited he's doing my Ashcan, and the Ashcan is super pulp. Like you think Tales of Zero, the main book is pulp, but in the Ashcan we went all the way into the pulp zone, and there's a lot of oblique Robert Howard references in there with what things are called and how, and then the story beats. I mean, it's only a 20-page story, I think. So I had to kind of compress it, but that actually both Lovecraft and Howard would do those short stories, those little pop-offs where it was just like, you got to get in, tell the story, create that wow moment and get out.
Do you remember in elementary school and high school, you'd read these short stories, anthologies, and they'd have these kind of really pulpy stories in them? You're like,
I do.
I wish those still existed. Like I loved reading those. Like you read something. I remember one called The Sentinel, and it was 1 page long. And it was about a soldier in a war, and he was watching a fight, and he was watching his enemy, and he kept saying that, the fight has been going on, and it's so horrible, and the life of a soldier is not good, and all he wants to do is get back to his wife. And then he says, and every time I see those creatures, it makes me sick. Their bodies are so different. You're like, oh my God, he's fighting aliens. And he says, I'm looking across the landscape, and I'm just waiting for the next one to come. And there it is. It's coming over. I can see it now in my sights. The way it runs even makes me sick. and it gets closer, I'm going to pull on the trigger. He goes, I'll never get over the way they die. They thrash around and they move around their pink skin with only 2 arms and 2 legs.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, this is wicked.
He's the alien. He's the alien. Yeah.
It's so awesome.
I know. I know. It's so true. It's so true. Those literature anthologies that we read, I mean, at least in America, they had this sort of like obsession with the Sgt. Pepper art style.
Yeah,
so we would get those psychedelic covers. They'd be like super psychedelic covers. Yeah. And you'd just be like, whoa, what are these things? I love those. They had some great stories in them. Yep.
You know, those are lost stories. Those were so wonderful. They were all probably from the 50s too and 40s. Those stories are old probably.
I do remember that one though. It's what's that woman? She's super talented and she wrote a bunch of these stories. Of course, I can't think of her name right now, but it was the one where they brought everyone into the auditorium just to hate one person.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, I remember reading that in one of those anthologies, and she also did the Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson.
She did the lottery, right?
The lottery. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And she was in a lot. Yeah, and she did a lot of pulpy sci-fi stuff. And but yeah, that one where they just the mass hating. I forget what it's called, but man, I remember we read that. I think I was in 7th or 8th grade when we read that, and that really left a mark. And now where we are as a culture now, we really are in this era of like mass hating. And if you can just get the whole internet to be angry at one person, just imagine what that actually feels like.
No, she's an American. Yeah.
When Shirley Jackson said that, it was like, but now it's kind of real. Like the internet can decide to hate someone, and it can turn on them, and it can be quite real.
You know, it's a hard time to get. I don't know if it's now or it's always been, but it's very hard to get any good conversation going on the computer. I find I don't enjoy it. There's almost nothing that's being said that's worthwhile, and it sounds to me like just people yelling or promoting themselves, and I'm just not
exactly.
I'd like to have a conversation like you and I are having in some way. It's not possible, it seems.
It really isn't. But you know what I learned to love, and you can't do this because the cat's out of the bag or so. But do you know? Oh, do you think Apex says your work reminds him of John Buscema? Ha ha.
He's my idol. Yeah.
Yeah. Jesse knows more about John Buscema than you and I will ever forget. Hey, El Gargoyle, thank you for the eggplant. But what was I talking about? Yeah. So my secret is I have more fun on Twitter because no one knows my real name and because I'm just a purple Smurf. So like, because I'm not a real person, I actually feel like I get in deeper conversations with people. Whereas if like, cause you're so right. It's when you are yourself, it's like people always take issue and like, I'm going to treat you this way because of you're this, you're that. But like as purple Smurf, you know, people don't know who I am. They don't know what I look like. They don't know anything about me. Of course, they can watch my live streams and figure out that I'm just a nerd. But it's weird. I actually had a better experience in the social media when I created a name that was meaningless. Mm-hmm. You know, that way you're just like people have to take you at kind of face value, and if someone doesn't want to like engage with me in a way, like who cares? Like it's just Purple Smurf. It doesn't affect me in real life. But in this show, I try to. Yeah, El Gargoyle, we're glad you're here. In this show, I try to. And if you go back and watch some of my other broadcasts, I really try to do what I'm doing with you, Jesse. I try to actually have legitimate, authentic conversations. You know, the exact thing you can't get on a computer. And like I've had like some of the great artists working, in my opinion, in indie comics right now, and we really talked. Where do your ideas come from? What are you thinking about? What is this? What is this? We actually talk instead of like whatever, you know, the other stuff that goes on. And so I appreciate you and me. I feel like you could be a regular on my show. I would love it very much because I think your breadth of knowledge is fun, and just really talking and not putting on airs of like, you know, I'm this and you're that, and what I say is important. You know, like we're just geeks talking about nerd stuff. I say all the time to people, and I think Brett is also someone who remembers this. But in my day, if you were reading if you were reading like Barry Windsor Smith X-Men 205 in 1986, like I was, and you were like blown away by like Robotech Macross, like I was in 1985, and your favorite like comic was the New Mutants, you were not cool. That did not make you cool. That made you a misfit, right? It wasn't like, oh, I'm into comics and that makes me cool. Like there was probably only one other person in your town who was interested in that, it's like, so I kind of like take some joy in connecting with people for whom, like for you and your friend, like that, like not everyone in your town was into that. Like you had to have a friend who was going to go there with you and risk being a little bit different or into different things. Where today online, it's like people's arguments over what they think anime is or isn't. It's like liking anime or having opinions about anime is their personality.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean,
and
there's
I'm
a
like,
little bit
that
of
doesn't work.
I grew up in the country, and we sort of just did. Everybody did the same sort of thing.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But anyways, I understand your point. I mean,
yeah,
I had a small town life, and like I've said this many times, and I realized things that I consider to be just the truth of the world are maybe sometimes not the same for people that lived in different situations. Like in my school, everybody liked heavy metal, like everybody.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
And my school, like everybody, I don't know, played with each other, and they were all different ages. We did.
Yeah.
There wasn't something like, you're grade 6. I'm not playing with you. We just played with you because there's no other kid. That was
another kid. Yeah. Yeah, I actually grew up in a pretty rural area myself. I mean, when I bought the X-Men 205, it was literally 75 cents on the spinner rack in a one-room store.
Yeah.
Literally the country store at the crossroads.
Yeah, same.
And I reminisce at that, like, my God, because I think that's Barry Windsor Smith's best work. That one issue is his finest achievement, in my opinion. And just to think that was just, you could buy that and a stick of gum.
Yeah.
in your little
X-Men, corner store. I know what you mean. I mean, I bought comics from the corner store all the time. I bought Moon Knight #1 in 1982.
Oh, wow.
From a grocery store. We used to have you remember they used to sell them in a plastic pack?
Yeah.
And there'd be one in the back and one in the front and then one in the middle.
The mystery one.
You never know what that one is. You're like, oh, I got Hot Stuff or Richie Rich. Oh, I got Richie Rich.
Totally.
I don't know who put those together. Was the grocery store that put them together?
No, I think Marvel just getting rid of overstock.
Okay. So you'd never get Richie Rich, but you'd get some. You get some.
You get Heathcliff. You get Heathcliff.
Yeah. I got Moon Knight #1 from that set, and I still have that exact issue. So, like, I've talked about this dozens of times with people about in the 80s, comics were, you could get them anywhere. Like you get them in the drugstore, you get them in the corner store, you get them in the grocery store. There was no comic shop at all.
Yeah, I know.
And then when comic shops came out, everything in the stores, they went away. And I think it's because of collections that sort of made this happen. I don't know.
Yeah. I know Apex and I have talked about this, but 86 was the year that I first went into a comic shop. That was the first time I saw The Dark Knight. Then that's where I got the Turtles and the Radioactive Black Belt Hamsters. You couldn't get that at your corner store, No,
that's like an indie comic. Yeah.
But it didn't become that speculator market where that changed. You could still get comics at the Woolworths in 1991 and 92. So it didn't totally go away, just when the 90s showed up. There was still, I have a friend who's from the Midwest, and his heyday was the actual Infinity Gauntlet storyline,
When was that?
That was in 91, 92. And the main character in that storyline was, forgive me, because it's not my era. Somebody in the chat, correct me, but I believe, was it Adam Warlock?
Yeah.
So Adam Warlock is the main character in the Infinity Gauntlet.
Adam Warlock is a cosmic marvel, and he fights Thanos all the time. He's got an infinity. He's got one of the stones on his head. Exactly.
So the funny thing is, like, how the MCU came along and made a movie that never featured the person who in the comics was the main person.
I never watched the movie. I don't. Who was the star of the movie?
Oh, I don't really. I actually don't care for comic book movies too much. But in the Marvel movies, it's always Iron Man, Captain America.
Iron Man. Oh yeah.
Iron Man, Captain America. There are always the two opposing sort of voices.
I read all those Thanos versus Adam Warlock in the reprints of the Silver Surfer. Remember when reprints of Silver Surfer in the 80s?
Yeah,
they had those in the back of them, and there was Warlock comic from the 70s.
Yeah.
I thought there was trippy and weird.
Yeah. There was so much good space sword and sorcery in the 70s.
So weird. Yeah, so weird.
So much weird good stuff. I got an old Strange Adventures, from DC, and was looking through that, and of course everything was written by Gardner Fox. So you sort of like in the backstory, the main story was Adam Strange, and then the backstory was just like, hey, Gardner Fox, we need something. 10 pages. Yeah. And so it's like straight out of Weird Tales. So what happens is there's a guy, it's not any DC title character, it's just a Gardner Fox freeform story. There's a guy, he's walking by a curio shop. He sees a red gemstone and he's like, that matches the one on my tie. He puts the two gemstones side by side, and then the ancient Toltec princess communicates to him and says, you're the ancestor of our champion. You've got to get on a plane right now to Brazil. So he goes on the plane to Brazil, and then he rides a flying lion with a griffin's beak and battles the wizard, saves the Toltec princess, and then brings her back to the future and marries her. And Gardner Fox did that in 6 pages as a backup story. Awesome. So you just, when I started to see that, I was like, okay, I get it. I see where the Weird Tales thing happened, where you got a guy like Gardner Fox and we need something for the book. It's like, oh, I can do that.
I could do that. Yeah. Throw that out.
Those backstories were fun. They could do a lot in those backstories. Yeah. You don't see those anymore. Apex agrees that Jim Starlin Warlock was great.
Yeah, Starlin. Yeah, that was his great moment before he did Metamorphosis, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got a couple of the Sienkiewicz Moon Knight books, and they're pretty good. I think
incredibly good.
The camera work, where he puts the camera. I'm thinking of this one. I think it's Moon Knight 4, where it all takes place in this gothic dark mansion. Yeah. And in the opening splash, Moon Knight is perched on the top of the mansion, and the camera is above his head, so you're looking down in a 3-point perspective. It's great. And then when the bad guy comes and his car rolls up the mansion step, he's got the camera down in a puddle, so the tire of the car splashes the camera as it goes by. That's a whole thing of where you put the viewer in the shot.
Moon Knight scared the pants off me, man. It was a street level comic, and I was just not ready for something like that. I mean, there's a part where they've got a guy dealing cocaine, and I was like, what? This is so adult. I thought it was so adult. I love Moon Knight. It was so rad.
I really want to read the whole Sienkiewicz run. I only have a few, but the thing with those is I learned my lesson, because my favorite comic of all time is The New Mutants.
I love The New Mutants, man.
Oh my God, that's my number one of all time.
Let's talk about New Mutants. I love it. I was basically in love with Danny Moonstar.
Oh, get serious,
I was in love with her. I was Me too. This girl is I was you remember at the beginning? I mean, bounce this off me. I'm going to try this, and no one picks this up when I say it. But when you read from issue 1 and you go straight forward, it seems like Danny's the main character.
Yes, it does.
You agree with me?
Yeah.
No one agrees with me. It seems like she's the main character.
No, it really does.
Not after a while, but it was all about her psychological problem, because she had this total issue with the fact that she had every person she cared about, she totally demolished them with that manifesting their fears, and she was totally by herself. And remember when she went into the danger room, and it was oh my God, that was so good. And she passes the test at the end, and then instantly something hits her and she knocks unconscious, and she finds herself in the Savage Land version of the danger room.
Oh, the Badlands,
The Badlands was awesome.
The Badlands is my favorite. That's my favorite issue. But yeah, if you read it from 1, it is interesting. Danny does seem to be the main character 100%. And it was also episodic and very pulpy early on. They're what can we do with these guys? We're going to drop them in the rainforest, and they're going to find this colony of ancient Rome, and they're going to be thrown in the gladiator pits of ancient Rome in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. If that isn't a pulpy kind of Conan setup, right? Where you're it was pure pulp. And then, but the thing is, I think is Bill McLeod. He had Dawnstar in the Teen Titans. So he was already in love with that character. And so he basically, when he made Danny Moonstar, I think he was just continuing
I didn't realize that. That's
brilliant. You should see how beautiful he draws Dawnstar in the Teen Titans, because I wasn't a DC person, but I got some of the old Teen Titans, and as soon as I saw Dawnstar, I fell in love with her too. I was like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful character I've ever seen in my life. And then I was like, wait a minute, no way. And then I did the math, and I was like, Bill McLeod creates Dawnstar 3 years later, he creates he's the person who creates the cast of characters for the New Mutants. I'm like, well, obviously he couldn't let that character go. So he revised her to become Danny Moonstar.
You know, and this is a thing about that. This is really true. Even though it's obviously on the nose, and it's something that you should even notice. Like, I mean, Rain speaks in an accent, a Scottish accent. When I was a kid, I'm not joking you, I had no acknowledgement of them being different ethnicities. I didn't know Danny was an Indian. I didn't know Roberto was from South America, because it didn't matter to me. Yeah. All I thought about them were these kids that were like me, and that's
they were so cool. I know.
I didn't have any acknowledgement of them being racial characters, and I didn't. Yeah. I think that's because I was very young, maybe. I don't know, but I just really thought them as just a bunch of children, and I liked it so much.
Me too. I loved Roberto. Like, I thought he was a great character. I almost write a character like him into everything I write. He was so influential on me. I just liked how he was. He was hot-headed, but he was also really normal,
classy.
Yeah, and he made mistakes. He went too far. He had to think about his actions. He was very loyal. He just had like a lot of realistic qualities of a friend you would want, and he was just someone I really admired, you know, as a fictional character. But yeah, for me, I was the same way. If you stopped me and said, like, you know, who are the characters that you're obsessed with? For me, you know, it was you know, obviously Storm was my favorite X-Men, Storm and Shadowcat, Illyana and Danny Moonstar. Like, I like the girls, you know, that's like a cliche that the best X-Men were women, but when I was reading comic books, I actually thought Storm was the coolest character. I thought Shadowcat was awesome. I loved Nightcrawler, Colossus, you know, Wolverine. And in the New Mutants, I liked Illyana. And it just, like, those characters, it wasn't like, oh, they're cool because they're girls. They were really cool girls, you know? Yeah. And, like, I found them to be just so interesting, and the way that they would relate to each other. Yeah, it was exactly like what you wanted. I wanted a cool group of friends who was so different, you know? So, yeah, I loved the New Mutants.
I didn't have enough attention to X-Men. My friend Peter that I mentioned, he's a millionaire now, and he's almost bought every X-Men comic. He's got almost the entire run. It's crazy. He's been working on it for the last 4 years, and he's like, his wife says to him, he's like, honey, I think I might want to do this, but I'm not sure about the money. She goes, Peter, you're a millionaire. You can buy them. So anyways, so he's the X-Men in my connection. I don't know X-Men at all. I didn't.
Oh, you would love it. You would love it. I mean, to me, I just happened to be a reader as an 11, 12-year-old kid, where it was so much of what was happening was the X-Men would cross over with the New Mutants, would cross over
confusing for me
with Power Pack, and it was so good. You know,
I couldn't follow it. It was like so many crosses that I didn't even know.
I'm gonna make you a couple issues you should read. But I know where I was going back with this. Yeah, so Moon Knight. I want to get all the Moon Knight comics, but I learned my lesson. My favorite comics sort of landmark of all time is Sienkiewicz on the New Mutants. And if you look at that in the trade paperback, it is awful. Everything wonderful about his art is ruined when it's put on the glossy paper and you don't see the dots. And you don't see the different thinness and thickness within the blacks. So Sienkiewicz would literally scrape things across the page. So when ink goes across the page, it's scraped. It has like weird marks in it. It's thin here, it's thick here. And when they reprint it in the trade, it's like all just one black with none of those gradations. And then all the colors have no gradations. It looks like a refrigerator magnet. It's appalling.
That's awful.
It's literally appalling. I mean, I know Sienkiewicz is never going to like hear me, but my friend, Marvel owes you a favor right now. They need to reprint the trade with textured paper, with all the texture of your art, because 40% of your art is not even there because it's texture. It's not just form. It's how it feels. It's how your eye, and that's what I'm trying to do with Tales of Zero is, and I'm going a little overboard to prove this point, is that your eye sees texture. It's like synesthesia or something. You see it and you feel it, right? You feel it with your sense of touch, even though you're only seeing it with your sense of sight. And I feel like that's something where, like, where's that gone in comics? Where's that sense of texture gone? So in Tales of Zero, I'm doing so much with that, you know, and it's all about like the way that the Sienkiewicz run affected me as a kid. I just loved it so much, and I didn't really think it was all that avant-garde. I just thought comics are awesome, and this is awesome. Didn't have a clue that it was avant-garde, but yeah, I'll make you a list of X-Men. You should do is they would do the annuals, like every X-Men annual, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87. They're all brilliant, and they're one shot. They're all one shots, so you don't need to even have the story to enjoy them.
I've read a handful of ones around the Morlocks time. I read the ones where Wolverine was in Japan. All that one with Lady Mariko that went blending into the limited series in 1982. I read the one that has, it's a kind of a solo Christmas issue with Kitty Pryde versus like the alien kind of, and it's like, that one? It's an awesome issue. I have a little bit of knowledge about them when the Brood was infecting them, but that's about all. I didn't honestly like it because it was too much jumping around to me. There was too many story threads, and I found a little bit melodrama. That's what I felt
like. It's very melodramatic, but I loved it. There was this storyline that happened in your favorite year, 82, 83, where it was like with Belasco. And that was definitely like Chris Claremont and Marvel Comics, like leaning into the satanic panic. So you had, Ozzy and Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and that's what kids were listening to in 83. And you had parents up in arms, there's too much satanic content. And so I think Claremont and the X-Men team was like, okay, is that what's hot right now?
Who's Belasco?
So Belasco is sort of like a sub Satan. He's not Satan, but he's like Satan's third lieutenant.
Okay.
So he's a stand-in for Satan, and so he gets into Aurora's head, he gets into Kitty Pryde's head, and he gets into Shadowcat's head, and just makes them go through all these crazy adventures. And then they brought in Dracula. They had like Storm versus Dracula, and then I believe that eventually through Belasco they actually did deal with Satan himself. And so there's all this, like, if you love like metal and the vibe of 82, you should find all the stories with Belasco and Kitty Pryde and Aurora, and it's just like, it's all full of imagery that if parents looked over your shoulder they would have been like remember,
if you're talking X-Men annuals, there's a red one, and it might be in 1982, and it's Storm as a vampire, and there's Dracula. One. Is that 82?
Yeah, that's 82.
I know, man. It's the greatest.
Yeah, that's the Sienkiewicz cover.
Yeah, it's Sienkiewicz. Yeah, I know that one. Yeah, I actually wanted to buy that one just because of the cover, and I never did. I'm going to go buy it.
You should. All right. Well, I usually wrap up my show at 1, so I'm a little over, but I think I'm going to have to say goodbye. Jesse, you got to come on my show again, okay?
Okay, I will.
But I got to wrap up. I hear my little girl calling, and let's continue this another time. We didn't even get to talk about your comic or shill mine, but I just love conversation with creative people. All right, I got to hang up. Good night, fans. Good night, people in the TV world. I got to go. Take care.
See ya.